At 5 o'clock, the rain was coming down so hard I almost drove past my own daughter. Ivy was curled beneath the bare maple tree beside my mother's porch, her backpack pressed against her chest, and water dripping from the ends of her hair. When I ran to her, she held up her key with both hands as if it had betrayed her. "My key won't work," she whispered. "Mine didn't either." I tried the front door, then the side door. Same result. A new silver deadbolt gleamed where the old brass lock had been that morning. Through the glass, I saw my sister Brooke standing in the hallway. My mother was behind her. Neither of them looked surprised to see Ivy soaked through. Then the door opened 3 inches, held by the security chain. My mother said, "We agreed you two don't live here anymore." I looked at my daughter shivering beside me, then at the new lock, and finally at the clock on my dashboard. Tomorrow morning at 9, an RN care manager from my mother's home care plan was scheduled to reassess the person who had supposedly been caring for her for the past 14 months. So I smiled. "Are you sure about that?" The next morning, at exactly 8:57, 3 hard knocks struck their front door. Brooke opened it, and the woman on the porch asked the one question neither my sister nor my mother knew how to answer. Before I tell you what she asked, I hope you're doing well today. Stay with me to the end, tell me what you would have done, and subscribe to the channel if you believe no child should ever have to beg to be let into her own home. But that question was still hours away. At that moment, all I could see was Ivy's hand trembling around a key that had opened the same door that morning. She told me she had gotten off the school bus at 4:20. She had tried the lock until her fingers hurt, then pressed the doorbell over and over. She called Grandma first, then Aunt Brooke. Both phones rang. Neither woman answered. "I saw the blue light on the camera," she said. I waved at it. Her phone had lasted just long enough to call me. By the time I arrived, the screen was black, and rain had worked its way beneath the cracked corner of the case. Water squished inside her sneakers whenever she shifted her feet. I turned back to the door. The new deadbolt was too clean, and pale curls of fresh wood clung to the frame. Someone had not simply decided we should leave. Someone had arranged for us to be unable to enter. "Please give me her dry clothes," I said through the gap. "Her allergy medicine is in the bathroom, and she needs her school computer." Brooke kept one hand on the edge of the door. "You can come back when everyone is calm." "She's 12, Brooke. She's soaking wet. She should have waited somewhere covered." Ivy flinched beside me. My mother saw it. She was close enough that I could make out the soft gray cardigan I had buttoned for her before work that morning, yet she did not reach for the chain. "Mom," I said, "did you know Ivy was outside?" Elaine's eyes shifted toward the glowing doorbell camera. This didn't have to become a scene. That was her answer. Behind Brooke, the living room looked wrong. Her framed photograph sat on the side table where Ivy's school picture had been. Her purse hung from the hook I used for my coat. A folded blanket covered the recliner where I usually sorted Mom's pills for the week. The room had not been cleaned. It had been staged. Then I remembered Karen's message from the week before. The reassessment was scheduled for 9 the next morning. She had specifically asked to speak with the person who prepared Mom's medication and handled problems during the night. Brooke had replied in the family group chat before I could. "I'll be there. I'm her primary caregiver." At the time, I had assumed she meant primary contact for the paperwork. Brooke handled forms. I handled the things that happened when forms were useless, like finding Mom on the bathroom floor at 2 in the morning, or sitting beside her until her blood pressure settled. Now Brooke needed me gone before someone started asking ordinary questions. I still did not know what she had written in those forms. I only knew the timing was not an accident. I took out my phone and photographed the new lock, the fresh wood around it, Ivy's wet clothes, and the unanswered calls on her screen. Brooke gave a small laugh. "Documenting your victimhood?" "No," I said. "Documenting where my daughter was left." I did not threaten her. I did not put my shoulder against the door. I did not tell Mom that I had a right to enter a house that had been my address for 16 months. Those arguments could wait. Ivy could not. I wrapped my coat around her, guided her to the car, and turned the heat as high as it would go. Her lips had lost their color. As she held her hands over the vents, I sent Karen a short email. I wrote that Ivy and I had been locked out of our residence without warning. I said I could no longer confirm or carry out the current care plan. I did not accuse Brooke of anything beyond what I could prove. We stopped at a discount store for sweatpants, socks, underwear, a sweatshirt, and a cheap phone charger that might bring Ivy's phone back to life. In the fitting room, she peeled off her wet socks and tried to hide how badly her feet were shaking. Once she was warm, I called the police non-emergency number. I explained that my driver's license, Ivy's school records, and our mail all carried that address. I asked for an incident number and a safe way to retrieve her medicine, computer, and identification. The officer did not promise to arrest anyone or open the door for me. He told me not to force my way inside and said I could request an officer to keep the peace while collecting essential belongings. That was enough for the moment. I needed a record, not a spectacle. I booked a room at a modest motel near Ivy's school and the hospital where I worked. Her father lived in Arizona and had not been part of our daily lives for 3 years. My only local family was standing behind that chained door. I could have called a coworker, but I would not make Ivy arrive dripping wet at someone else's home and listen while I explained why her grandmother had refused to open a door. The motel room smelled faintly of bleach and old carpet, but the shower was hot. Ivy stayed beneath the water until steam clouded the mirror. When she came out wearing the oversized sweatshirt, she looked younger than 12. "Did Grandma see me?" she asked. I sat beside her on the bed. Lying would have been easier, but it would also have taught her to doubt what she had seen. "The camera was on," I said. "So yes, I believe they knew you were there." Her eyes filled. "Did I do something?" "No." I took her cold hands between mine. "This was a choice made by adults. You did nothing to cause it, and you do not have to earn your way back through that door." She leaned against me, but neither of us cried. We were too tired for that. My phone showed 4 missed calls from Mom. In the voicemail, her voice sounded irritated rather than sorry. "Rachel, don't make this bigger than it needs to be. Call me when you've calmed down." I set the phone face down. A minute later, Brooke sent a text. "Come at 8:45 for Ivy's school things. Be gone before 9. I read it twice. She was not offering us a chance to collect our belongings. She was giving us a 15-minute window before someone arrived. I placed the old blue-capped key on the motel table and set my alarm. Until that night, I had believed they wanted me out of the house. Looking at Brooke's message, I finally understood that was not enough. They wanted the woman arriving at 9 to believe I had never lived there at all. I dropped Ivy at school the next morning with a borrowed backpack and no computer. She stood beside the passenger door longer than usual, both hands wrapped around the straps. I had washed her sneakers in the motel sink, but the fabric was still damp, and the oversized sweatshirt I had bought the night before hung past her fingertips. "Are you going back there?" she asked. "Only to get what you need." "What if they don't give it to you?" I wanted to tell her that adults could not simply take a child's belongings because they were angry with her mother. After the night we had just spent, promises like that sounded careless. "Then I'll make a list," I said, "and I'll keep asking in the right way." She studied my face, deciding whether I believed myself. Then she nodded and walked toward the school entrance without looking back. I reached my mother's house at 8:45 exactly. For 16 months, I had known that house by sound. The loose gutter tapped against the brick whenever the wind came from the west. The furnace made a low groan before the heat reached the upstairs vents. The third stair complained under anyone heavier than Ivy. That morning, from behind the windshield, it looked like a place I had once visited rather than the home where my daughter's height was marked in pencil on a bedroom doorframe. A black trash bag sat on the porch. Brooke opened the door before I reached the steps. She did not remove the security chain. "That's Ivy's," she said, nodding toward the bag. I loosened the knot. Inside were 2 pairs of jeans, 3 shirts, socks, and the sweatshirt Ivy had outgrown the previous winter. Her clothes had been pushed together while still on their hangers, then crushed into the plastic. "Where's her school computer?" "You can discuss the rest with Mom. Her allergy medicine is in the upstairs bathroom. My work documents are in the desk. I also need the gray medication notebook from the kitchen." Brooke's expression sharpened at the last item. "That belongs to the house. I bought it. You used it for Mom, so it stays with Mom." The notebook contained no secrets as far as I knew. It was a plain gray binder where I recorded blood pressure readings, appointment questions, medication changes, and the small incidents that seemed harmless until a doctor asked when they began. Brooke folded her arms. "You don't get to empty the place because you're angry. I'm asking for my daughter's school property, her medicine, and records I need for work. You can come inside after you've spoken to Mom and agreed to stop sending dramatic emails." I checked the time on my phone. 8:55. Brooke followed my glance. "You have 4 minutes. Take the bag and go." That was when a dark blue sedan pulled up behind mine. A woman stepped out carrying a leather portfolio and a small medical bag. I recognized Karen Whitmore before she reached the walkway. She had been the RN care manager, assigned when Mom came home from rehabilitation. Karen was the person who had sat at our kitchen table while Mom signed a limited authorization allowing her to speak with me about the parts of the care plan I helped manage. Karen looked from me to the trash bag, then to the chain door. "Rachel?" Brooke opened the door wider but left the chain in place. "She's leaving." Karen's eyes rested briefly on my motel clothes and the bag at my feet. "I thought Rachel lived here." "She moved out 6 weeks ago," Brooke said. "She came back this morning to cause trouble." I could have interrupted. I could have listed the mail in my name, the monthly transfers to Mom, Ivy's school records, and the groceries still sitting in the refrigerator. Instead, I waited. Karen turned to me. "Your email said you and Ivy were locked out last night. And I have an incident number from the non-emergency line." Brooke gave an impatient laugh. "She exaggerates everything. She sleeps here sometimes because she likes making Mom dependent on her." 16 months is a long sleepover," I said. Brooke's face tightened. "See? This is what she does." Mom appeared behind her, one hand gripping the walker I had helped adjust 2 weeks earlier. She wore the same gray cardigan from the day before. "Karen, this is family business," she said. "There's no reason to cancel the assessment." Karen did not argue about the lock or ask who legally lived in the house. She looked at Mom's posture, the walker, and the color in her face. "All right," she said. "Then we'll begin with safety." Brooke unhooked the chain and let Karen inside. I remained on the porch beside the trash bag. Karen paused in the entryway. "Rachel, your authorization is still active. I may need to ask you questions about care you personally provided." Brooke looked at Mom. "I thought we removed her." "You reported that she no longer lived here," Karen said. "That is not the same as revoking an authorization." Mom's hand tightened around the walker. Karen placed her portfolio on the dining table. From the porch, I could see the kitchen beyond her. My blue ceramic mug was gone from the counter. Brooke's keys rested beside the fruit bowl. Karen asked Brooke to bring the current medication list. Brooke opened one drawer, then another. "It should be in the kitchen," she said. "The printed list or the handwritten one?" Karen asked. Brooke looked toward Mom. Karen continued. "What time does Elaine take her anticoagulant?" "Morning." "Which one?" "The blood thinner." "What is the name?" Brooke hesitated. "Eliquis." Mom was not taking Eliquis. Karen glanced at me, but I kept my hands wrapped around the handles of the trash bag. "When was the dose last adjusted?" she asked. Brooke's voice became defensive. "Her doctor handles that." "Of course. Who received the instructions after the cardiology appointment?" "I did." "And what changed?" Brooke looked at Mom again. "It was a small adjustment." The instinct to answer rose so quickly that I stepped forward before catching myself. Mom's warfarin schedule had been changed 10 days earlier, after her INR came back too high. I had written the new pattern in the gray notebook and taped a copy inside the cabinet. Karen saw the movement. "Rachel? The schedule changed after the blood test," I said carefully. "But I can't confirm what has happened since I was locked out. I don't know who prepared last night's dose." Brooke turned on me. "You see what she's doing? She wants Mom removed from her home." I said I don't know who prepared the medication. "She's jealous because Mom chose me to handle things officially." Karen raised one hand. "This is not about jealousy. I need to identify who is carrying out the approved plan." Brooke walked to the cabinet above the microwave and pulled out the taped schedule. She held it like evidence that she had known where it was all along. Karen read it. "Who wrote this?" No one answered. My handwriting slanted across the page. Karen asked what Brooke did when Mom became dizzy while standing. Brooke said she made her sit down and drink water. Karen asked when to check her blood pressure, what symptoms required an urgent call, and where the emergency instructions were kept. Brooke answered in generalities. She used phrases like, "I keep an eye on her," and "I know when something is wrong." Each answer sounded caring, until Karen asked what it meant in practice. Mom finally interrupted. "Brooke knows me better than any nurse." Karen closed the cabinet. "Then speaking separately should not be a problem." Brooke's shoulders lifted. "Rachel filled your head with this before you even arrived." "I sent one email," I said. "I stated that the locks had been changed. Ivy had been left outside in the rain, and you told me to leave before 9. Because you were making a scene. You gave me a 15-minute window." Karen looked at the trash bag, then at the clock above the stove. "I can't complete this assessment while there is a dispute about who is actually providing care." Mom's face lost color. "You said this was routine." "It was routine until the information stopped matching." Karen asked me to prepare a written account of the care I had personally provided. She did not ask me to interpret Brooke's actions or accuse anyone of fraud. She told me to use dates, messages, appointment calendars, and tasks I remembered doing myself. Brooke stepped between us. "You are rewarding her for sabotaging this family." Karen's voice remained level. "I am verifying who performed the work." I lifted the trash bag. "Can Ivy have her computer now?" Brooke stared at me for several seconds, then retrieved it from the hallway table along with the allergy medicine. She did not bring my work documents or the gray notebook. As I turned toward the driveway, Karen followed me to the edge of the porch. "Rachel," she said quietly, "do you understand how Brooke is listed in the current plan?" I thought she received a few paid respite hours when I was working late. Karen watched my face before answering. "According to the plan, Brooke is the paid direct care worker assigned most of the approved hours. You are listed as unpaid natural support." The words felt too formal to belong to my life. I looked through the glass toward the kitchen where I had measured pills every Sunday, tracked Mom's blood pressure, slept on the recliner after bad nights, and left notes before rushing to work. Karen lowered her voice. "According to this file, Brooke has been the person caring for your mother nearly every day for 14 months. I looked at the black trash bag in my hand, and then at the room beyond the new lock. The house had not only changed the name of the person allowed through its door, it had changed the name of the woman who had lived the life inside it. Back at the motel, I opened my calendar and scrolled to the week my mother came home from rehabilitation. Karen had asked for a written account of the care I had personally provided, but the blank page on my laptop made the last 18 months feel impossible to measure. There was no appointment labeled the night my mother called, because she was afraid to sleep alone. No receipt captured how long I sat beside her bed, listening to the uneven rhythm of her breathing. I began with the dates I could prove. Mom's discharge appointment was still in my phone. So were the cardiology visits, blood tests, physical therapy sessions, and pharmacy pickups. Beside each one, I wrote what I remembered doing. The first month after her stroke, I drove across town every morning before work to prepare breakfast and make sure she had taken her medication. At night, I returned to help her shower because she was terrified of falling when no one was there. She tried to hide that fear at first. I raised 2 daughters, she told me one evening as I steadied her beside the bathtub. I can wash my own hair. Then her knee buckled, and she grabbed my wrist so hard her nails left marks. 2 months later, Ivy and I moved into the house. I had told myself it would be temporary. Mom needed someone nearby until her balance improved, and my lease was almost finished. Moving in seemed practical, even kind. Ivy was excited to live with her grandmother. On our first night, Mom let her draw a pencil line on the bedroom doorframe and write her age beside it. That house had not always felt like a trap. When Ivy was a baby, Mom had slept on my couch for 2 weeks so I could recover from a difficult delivery. She had held my daughter while I studied for my pharmacy technician certification, rocking her with one foot while quizzing me from flashcards. After my father died, Mom kept his blue ceramic coffee mug in the kitchen for me. She never used it herself. Whenever I visited, it was waiting on the second shelf, handle turned outward. That was why I had stayed longer than a few months. It was also why I had not noticed the moment helping became an obligation. No one asked permission to extend. I added medication preparation to my list. Blood pressure checks, low-sodium meals, bathing assistance, transportation, phone calls to doctors, nights spent listening for the walker in the hallway. The work had grown slowly enough to seem normal. Brooke handled the paperwork. She told me Mom qualified for a program that could reimburse a family member for occasional coverage, mileage, and supplies. I knew she received money. I had never objected because Brooke did sometimes take Mom to lunch, collect prescriptions, or stay with her when I worked late. I believed the payment reflected those hours. Looking through my messages, I found one from the previous March. Thanks for covering last night. How's Mom this morning? At the time, I had read it as gratitude. Now the word covering felt different. It suggested Brooke believed the night belonged to her, and I had stepped in as a substitute. There were more messages like it. How's she doing tonight? Thanks for handling the appointment. Let me know if Mom gives you trouble with the shower. Brooke often knew what had happened without being there. I had assumed Mom told her because sisters shared information. I had never wondered whether those conversations had another purpose. Brooke was good at looking involved. She posted photographs of herself taking Mom to lunch, smiling across a restaurant table beneath captions about family responsibility. On appointment days, she sometimes arrived during the last 10 minutes, took a picture beside Mom, then left before the pharmacy opened. I had done the parts no one photographed. 4 months earlier, my supervisor offered me a team lead position. It came with better pay, but the schedule rotated evenings twice a week. Mom said she could manage, yet the next morning she became dizzy and called me from the bathroom floor. I declined the position. That same month, Ivy quit drama club because rehearsals ended after 6, and I could not promise to pick her up. She told me she did not mind. I wanted to believe her. As I worked through the calendar, Ivy sat cross-legged on the other motel bed, completing an assignment on the school computer we had recovered. "Was that Grandma's doctor?" she asked when I entered another appointment. "Yes. You missed my rehearsal that day." I looked at the date. She was right. "I'm sorry." "I know." She closed the computer halfway. "Did Grandma ever thank you for all of this?" The question made me defensive. Before it made me sad. She didn't have to thank me every time. She's my mother. Ivy watched me for a moment. "That isn't what I asked." My phone rang before I had to answer. Karen began by explaining that Elaine's limited authorization allowed her to discuss the parts of the care plan I had participated in. It did not make me Mom's medical decision maker, and it did not give me access to Brooke's full records or payment information. "I can ask what you did," she said. "I can verify your role. I can't send you someone else's service notes." "I understand." "Did you know Brooke was assigned approximately 39 paid hours each week?" I stopped typing. "No. I thought she had a few respite shifts and mileage reimbursement. And you understood your own role to be what? Her daughter. Karen waited. Unpaid support, I added. I suppose that's what the form would call it. The phrase felt insulting, even though it was technically true. My mother had never paid me for the missed shifts, the groceries, or the $650 I transferred each month toward the house. I had not asked her to. I looked again at Brooke's messages. 39 hours a week was not occasional help. It was nearly a full-time job. Was Brooke actually there for those hours? Karen asked. I can only tell you when I know she wasn't. That mattered. I did not want anger to turn me careless. I opened Brooke's social media page and remembered several weekends she had traveled. A bridal shower in Baltimore, a wedding in Ohio, a lake trip with friends. I could place some of those dates because I had stayed home with Mom while Brooke posted photographs from another state. I did not yet have the official records to compare them against. I'll send you my schedule and the dates I can verify, I said. Nothing more. After the call, the family group chat began filling with messages. Brooke wrote that I was using my pharmacy training to confuse an elderly woman and take control of her medical decisions. An aunt replied that family problems should remain inside the family. Another relative said Mom needed peace, not an investigation. I typed 3 different responses and deleted all of them. Explaining myself had always been my first instinct. If I found the correct words, I believed everyone would finally understand. That afternoon, I saved screenshots of the messages, muted the group, and returned to my calendar. Karen called again near sunset. I need to verify a date without telling you what another person documented, she said. March 17th, at approximately 2:15 in the morning. Where were you? The motel room seemed to become smaller. I was at Mom's house. Who else was present? Ivy was asleep upstairs. Brooke was in Ohio for a wedding. What happened with Elaine? I closed my eyes. I heard something fall in the bathroom. Mom was on the floor beside the vanity. Her blood pressure was high, and she was frightened. I called the nurse line and stayed with her until it came down. Karen asked me not to add anything I was uncertain about. I described the cold tile beneath my knees, Mom's hand locked around mine, and the time displayed on the blood pressure monitor. When I finished, Karen remained quiet. Why are you asking about that night? I said. I'm verifying who performed the care. But Brooke wasn't there. I understand. My hand tightened around the phone. Why is that night in Brooke's file? Karen did not accuse my sister or offer me a conclusion she had not yet earned. That, she said, is what I'm trying to determine. That is what I'm trying to determine, Karen had said. After the call ended, I sat with my hands still wrapped around the phone, staring at the calendar on my laptop. Until then, I had been trying to prove how much work I had done. Now, I understood that I also had to prove where Brooke had not been. Anger wanted me to write everything at once, but anger could make a clean truth look like revenge, so I forced myself to begin only with records that belonged to me. My hospital schedule showed every shift I had worked, and every day I had left early. Pharmacy receipts showed when I picked up Mom's medication packs. Ivy's school calendar reminded me which performances, parent meetings, and dinners I had missed because Mom needed help. The photographs on my phone were even harder to look at. One showed the weekly medication packs spread across the kitchen table. Another showed Mom's blood pressure monitor beside my cold coffee at 3 in the morning. Each date opened into a memory. On one Tuesday in February, I had fallen asleep upright in the recliner because Mom was afraid another dizzy spell would come if I went upstairs. On a Friday in April, Ivy had eaten reheated pasta alone while I sat on the bathroom floor with Mom's hand locked around mine. In June, I had promised Ivy we would watch a movie together, then spent the evening on the phone with a nurse because Mom's ankles had begun to swell. Those moments had felt private when they happened. Now I was turning them into a timeline because someone else had placed her name over them. The dates Karen had asked about began forming a pattern. After nearly every difficult night, Brooke had sent a message the next morning. How's Mom tonight? Thanks for handling it. Let me know if she gives you trouble. The messages did not prove where Brooke was by themselves, but several were paired with photographs she had posted from restaurants, weddings, or weekends away. She had not been in the house, yet she knew enough to speak as if I had merely completed part of her shift. Karen called before noon and repeated the limits of what she could discuss. Mom's authorization allowed her to speak with me about medication coordination and the care I had personally provided, but I was not Mom's medical power of attorney. As long as Mom remained capable of making her own decisions, I could not demand her complete file or make choices for her. I won't send you Brooke's service notes, Karen said. I can ask you what you did and compare your answer with what has been reported. I can also tell you when something directly involving your role needs clarification. I told her that was enough. I did not want information I was not entitled to, only a chance to state accurately what I had done. An hour later, Brooke sent Karen an email and copied me. She claimed I had deliberately kept Mom's medication notebook in my bedroom, preventing her from learning the care routine. She said my refusal to share information was the reason she had struggled during the assessment. There was enough truth in the accusation to sting. I had maintained the gray notebook and kept it near my bed on nights when Mom was unstable, because I wanted it within reach if I had to call the nurse line. Brooke had never asked me to teach her the system, but I had also never insisted that she learn. I replied only to Karen. I maintained the notebook because I handled most medication questions. Brooke had access to the house and knew where the current pharmacy packs and printed schedule were kept. I should have created a clearer handoff, but I did not prevent her from learning. Admitting my part made me feel exposed, but it also kept Brooke from turning one imperfect choice into proof that everything else was false. Her private message arrived minutes later. Keep pushing this and I'll tell your hospital you tampered with Mom's medication. Let's see how long a pharmacy tech keeps her job after that. My stomach tightened as I imagined my supervisor reading those words without context, but I did not answer her. I opened the pharmacy portal I was authorized to use as Mom's designated pickup contact and checked the dispensing history. Her medication had been issued in sealed dose packs prepared by the pharmacy. I had never counted controlled pills into homemade containers, changed a prescription, or altered a dose on my own. When the doctor changed Mom's warfarin schedule, I had written the instruction exactly as it was provided and taped the printed copy inside the cabinet. I saved Brooke's threat and forwarded it to Karen as evidence of pressure. Mom called that afternoon. Her voice was softer than Brooke's, carrying the familiar tiredness that had made me forgive her before she ever apologized. You embarrassed your sister, she said. She was trying to help me, and now Karen is treating her like a criminal. I told her I had only described the work I had done, then asked why she had said I moved out 6 weeks earlier. There was a pause long enough for me to hear the television in the background before she answered that Brooke only wanted Karen to understand I was not the sole person helping. That is not what moving out means, I said. Mom sighed and accused me of making words harsher than they needed to be. I looked across the motel room at Ivy, who was reading on the bed with her headphones on, and asked Mom whether she knew Brooke was listed as her primary paid caregiver. Your sister handled the forms, she replied. I signed what she put in front of me. The answer gave me something to hold on to. Mom hated paperwork, and since the stroke, long pages made her impatient and anxious. I wanted to believe Brooke had buried the truth beneath boxes, signatures, and explanations Mom had not fully followed. When I asked whether she had read the forms, Mom said, I trusted my daughter. She meant Brooke. The words landed before she seemed to realize what they implied. Mom quickly asked me to come home so we could talk like adults. She said Ivy could sleep in her own bed and I could stop frightening the family over a misunderstanding. I asked whether the old lock would be restored. We can discuss the key when you get here, she answered. That told me her offer was not an apology. It was another door I could enter only after agreeing that what happened outside it did not matter, so I ended the call without promising to return. Near evening, Karen phoned again, and asked me to describe the bathroom incident from March 17th without giving me any details first. I repeated what I remembered, including the sound of the fall, Mom beside the vanity, the blood pressure monitor, and my call to the nurse line. Karen asked where Ivy and Brooke had been, and I explained that Ivy was asleep upstairs while Brooke was attending a wedding in Ohio. Then Karen asked, "Did you ever tell Brooke that Elaine's left slipper was caught beneath the vanity?" The question stopped me. That slipper had been wedged so far under the cabinet that I had to lie on the tile and reach for it after Mom was safely in bed. I remembered the damp dust on my sleeve, and Mom whispering that she felt foolish. It was not medically important. I had not written it in the gray notebook, and I had never mentioned it to Brooke. "No," I said. "Only Mom and I knew." Karen did not tell me where she had seen the detail, and she did not need to. She had asked because it appeared somewhere connected to care Brooke claimed she had provided. I had spent the day wondering how my sister had taken credit for my work. Now I saw that Brooke could not have built the story alone. Someone inside that bathroom had carried a private detail from the floor, where I knelt into a record bearing my sister's name. The question was no longer what Brooke had stolen from me. It was what my mother had chosen to give her. I did not sleep after Karen asked about the slipper beneath the vanity. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard the sound that had pulled me from bed that night in March. It had not been a scream, only a heavy thud, followed by the scrape of something against tile. I had crossed the hallway barefoot and found Mom on the bathroom floor, one leg folded beneath her and her left slipper trapped under the cabinet. For one terrible second, I thought she had suffered another stroke. I knelt beside her and asked her to smile, lift both arms, and repeat a simple sentence while I watched her face for weakness. Her speech was clear, but her blood pressure was high, and her hands would not stop shaking. I called the nurse line, followed each instruction, and stayed on the tile until the numbers began to come down. Mom had refused to go to the emergency room. She gripped my hand and whispered, "Please, don't leave me here alone." There had been nothing calculated in her voice. She was frightened, and I was her daughter, so I stayed until nearly dawn with my back against the bathtub and her head resting against my shoulder. The next morning, Brooke sent one message. "Thanks for covering." I had been too tired to notice what the word implied. Karen arranged to meet me at the MCO office later that morning. The building sat behind a medical plaza, all beige walls and fluorescent light. But the small conference room felt less intimidating than my mother's kitchen had the day before. Karen did not place a file in front of me, or show me any record carrying Brooke's name. She brought only a blank notepad and asked me to describe what I understood about the home care arrangement. I told her Brooke had said the program reimbursed her for occasional help, mileage, and a few shifts when I worked late. Karen listened without correcting me until I finished. Then she explained that under Mom's participant-directed care arrangement, Mom was not merely receiving services. She was also considered the employer responsible for approving Brooke's visits. "The system records when a paid caregiver clocks in and out," Karen said. "If a visit needs to be corrected, there is a process for that. Those entries are reviewed and approved under Elaine's role." I felt the old explanation slipping away from me. I had wanted to believe Brooke filled out forms while Mom signed without understanding them. One confused signature could be explained. 14 months of repeated approvals were harder to dismiss. Could Brooke have changed the hours after Mom approved them? I asked. "Compliance will review the history," Karen replied. "They can examine when visits were entered, when corrections were requested, and which account approved them. I am not going to guess before they do." "What about the notes?" Karen folded her hands over the blank pad. "I cannot show you Brooke's service records. I can only ask whether you performed a particular task and compare your answer with what has been reported." I thought about the slipper. "Someone knew what happened in that bathroom." "Yes," she said. "The question is how that information entered the record." Karen warned me not to turn every strange memory into proof. If I was unsure of a date, I needed to say so. If I did not know Brooke's location, I could not assume she had been absent. The investigation would be weaker, not stronger, if I filled gaps with anger. I promised to provide only what I could support. It was not the promise of a daughter trying to protect her family anymore. It was the promise of a woman trying to preserve the difference between what she feared and what she knew. When I left the office, I sat in my car for several minutes before starting the engine. Across the street, a red sign stood in front of a narrow brick building advertising a 2-bedroom apartment for rent. It was close enough to Ivy's school that she could walk in good weather, and the hospital was less than 15 minutes away. I copied the phone number into my contacts, but did not call. Some part of me still believed Karen would discover one mistake, Mom would apologize, and Brooke would return the old key. I was gathering evidence against a story I still hoped was not true, while imagining myself back at the same kitchen table by the end of the week. I found Ivy in the public library after school. We had recovered her school computer, but the charger was still locked inside Mom's house, and the battery had died halfway through the morning. She was using a library computer beneath a sign reminding visitors to limit sessions to 1 hour. When she saw me, she quickly minimized the motel website she had opened. I was checking whether they charge more on weekends. You don't have to worry about that. I know, she said, which meant she had already been worrying. She packed her notebook and asked if we could leave through the side entrance. 2 girls from her class were near the front desk, and Ivy did not want them to see the plastic shopping bag she was using for her books. They think we're remodeling our house, she said once we reached the parking lot. I looked at the bag, cutting into her fingers. The lockout had begun as a fight between adults, but it was already rearranging the way my daughter walked through school, the stories she told her friends, and the amount of space she believed she was allowed to occupy. Mom called while we were driving back to the motel. I pulled into an empty section of the parking lot before answering. What exactly did you tell Karen? She asked. There was no greeting and no question about Ivy's cold, her wet clothes, or whether she had slept. Mom's first concern was the file. I told her what care I performed. You made it sound like Brooke did nothing. I described what I did. Karen can determine the rest. Mom complained that the review had frozen everything and that Brooke was being treated unfairly. I listened until she paused, then asked the question that had kept me awake. Did you tell Brooke about the night you fell in the bathroom? Mom became quiet. Did you tell her about the slipper under the vanity? I tell your sister things, she said finally. She worries. Why would she need to know which slipper was trapped under the cabinet? You're turning a family conversation into evidence. Why would she need the exact time? Why would she need your blood pressure reading? Mom's breathing changed. I could picture her pressing her lips together the way she did whenever a conversation moved toward something she had already decided not to admit. Then, she changed the subject. The property taxes are behind, she said. The insurance went up again. Brooke found a way to bring some money into the house, and suddenly you want to tear everything apart. I tightened my hand around the steering wheel. Was the money used for the house? Some of it. How much? That is not the point. If a little money helps keep a roof over all of us, who is being hurt? I looked at Ivy in the passenger seat. She had turned toward the window, but I knew she could hear every word. She was left outside that roof in the rain, I said. Mom did not answer. I had spent 2 days trying to protect the possibility that Brooke had acted alone. Mom's words did not tell me how deeply she had participated, but they destroyed the idea that she knew nothing. She understood there was money attached to the care. She understood the house benefited. She understood that Brooke needed details. What I still did not know was whether Mom had simply answered questions or helped build the story deliberately. That evening, Ivy sat on the motel bed while I tried to revive the old charger with tape. The blue-capped key lay beside my phone, useless but still carried everywhere out of habit. Ivy picked it up and turned it between her fingers. If we don't live there anymore, does that mean you don't have to go back tonight when Grandma calls? I stared at her. My family had removed my clothes, changed the locks, and told my child we no longer belonged in the house. Yet both Mom and Brooke still assumed I would remain available whenever the house needed me. Before I could answer, My phone began vibrating across the table. Brooke's name filled the screen. I almost let it ring out, but then a message appeared beneath it. Mom is dizzy. I don't know which dose she takes tonight. Get back here now. My body reacted before my mind did. I stood, grabbed my purse, and closed my hand around the car keys. For 18 months, that movement had been automatic. Then I saw Ivy watching me from the bed. I slowly put the keys down, called Karen, and reached for the number of the nurse line. Brooke answered on the fourth ring, already shouting that Mom could barely stand and that I needed to get there immediately. I asked whether Mom's face looked uneven, whether she could raise both arms, whether her speech sounded different, and whether she had severe chest pain or trouble breathing. Brooke accused me of wasting time, but I made her answer each question. When she said Mom's speech was clear and both arms stayed level, I told her to call the nurse line immediately and dial 911 if any stroke warning appeared or if Mom became less responsive. I called Karen next and sent the current medication list directly to her secure office address, along with the cardiologist's number, the date of the last blood test, and the written dosing change I had received 10 days earlier. I did not send the information privately to Brooke. After her threat to accuse me of tampering, I wanted every safety instruction to pass through someone who could verify what had been sent and when. Karen stayed on the phone with Brooke while the on-call nurse evaluated Mom. I remained in the motel with Ivy, answering only questions about what I knew before the lockout. I did not tell Brooke which pill to give or try to diagnose Mom from across town. When the nurse advised that Mom be examined, Karen arranged the next steps while I repeated that any sudden weakness, confusion, chest pain, or loss of consciousness required 911. For almost an hour, every part of me expected the phone to ring with news that something terrible had happened because I had not driven back. Ivy sat beside me on the bed without speaking, her shoulder pressed against mine. I realized she was waiting to see whether one frightened call could still pull us through the door that had been locked against her. Karen contacted me later that evening. Mom had been assessed, and there was no sign of a new stroke. Brooke had confused the old medication schedule with the recently adjusted one and left out an evening dose because she believed it had already been discontinued. The mistake had not caused a medical catastrophe, but it had left Mom anxious, dizzy, and without a reliable person in the house who understood the current plan. Relief came first, followed by a guilt so familiar that it almost felt like duty. I imagined Mom sitting beneath the kitchen light, with her hands wrapped around a glass of water, frightened and angry that I had not appeared. Then I looked at Ivy, still wearing clothes bought from a discount store, because her own closet was behind a lock, and reminded myself that Mom had not been abandoned. A nurse had evaluated her, Karen had the correct information, and emergency care had been available if needed. Brooke told the family a different story. She wrote in the group chat that Mom had suffered a serious medical episode while I sat in a motel refusing to help. She said I was punishing an elderly woman to win an argument, and that Karen's involvement had made everything slower. Relatives began replying before I finished reading, accusing me of cruelty, and asking how I could live with myself if something happened to my mother. I answered once. I said I had contacted Karen, provided the current medication information, helped connect Brooke with the nurse line, and remained available for safety questions. I added that the medical professional involved had confirmed I did not need to drive to the house. Then I muted the group again. I would not argue with a version of events designed to make my physical presence the only acceptable proof that I cared. Karen documented that Brooke had been unable to follow the medication plan independently. While the service review continued, she began arranging a temporary professional caregiver who could supervise Mom's routine and make sure instructions were current. The solution was ordinary and practical, which somehow made Brooke even angrier. A trained person entering the house would see what I had done there without needing the family's permission to name it. Mom called after she had settled. I expected fear, perhaps even gratitude, but her first words were, I knew you'd never let anything happen to me." Her tone carried quiet satisfaction, as though the evening had proven that the lock, the rain, and the lie about where I lived had changed nothing important. "You knew I would make sure you were safe," I said. "Of course I did. You're my daughter." The sentence should have sounded loving. Instead, it revealed the bargain she believed we had made. She could remove my child from the house, deny my place in the family, and still count on my labor the moment the consequences became uncomfortable. "I will give Karen whatever information keeps you medically safe," I told her. "That does not mean I am coming back to resume the same arrangement." Mom's voice hardened. "Brooke wants to meet with you. Please stop punishing everyone long enough to listen." Brooke chose a diner near the highway the following afternoon. She was already seated in a back booth when I arrived, a folder beside her coffee and a new brass key placed carefully on the table. She slid it toward me before I had removed my coat. "Mom wants you and Ivy home," she said. "We all need to calm down and fix this." I looked at the key, but did not touch it. "Did Mom ask you to change the locks?" We both agreed the situation had become unhealthy. "You left Ivy outside. You keep using that as if we knew the weather would get worse." She rang the bell and called both of you. Brooke pushed the folder across the table. "This is how we move forward." The first page described me as a family member who provided occasional unpaid assistance. Another paragraph stated that Brooke had remained the primary caregiver and that any confusion about our living arrangements resulted from a private family dispute unrelated to the care plan. I was expected to acknowledge that I had contacted Karen while upset and agree not to make further claims without first discussing them with Brooke. In exchange, Ivy and I could return to our rooms. Brooke said she would give me the new key immediately and share part of the monthly payment as recognition for the help I sometimes provided. She spoke as though I had finally negotiated a promotion in a job I had never applied for. I asked where the money had gone. Brooke said the property taxes were behind, the homeowner's insurance had increased, and Mom's utility bills were higher than expected. Then she admitted some of the money had paid debts from her salon and several personal credit cards. She defended that part by saying the salon was how she supported herself and remained available to Mom. "If the program collapses, Mom could lose the house," she said. "Do you want her dragged into a nursing home because you needed credit?" I knew the house had real problems. Mom had delayed tax payments and worried constantly about insurance, but no medical agency was arriving tomorrow to seize the property. Brooke was blending a genuine financial strain with the most frightening outcome she could imagine, then placing responsibility for preventing it in my hands. I continued reading. Near the end, the agreement stated that I would remain available whenever the primary caregiver could not cover a shift. Those hours would not be entered under my name, and I would not receive payment unless Brooke approved it separately. "You want me to keep doing the work," I said. "You understand Mom better than anyone. That is why this makes sense." Her answer was so calm that I finally saw the structure clearly. My competence was not a reason to recognize me. It was the reason they believed I should continue without recognition. I slid the key back across the table. Brooke stared at it as though I had rejected the house itself. "I'm keeping the draft," I said. "Karen needs to see what you're asking me to sign." Brooke leaned forward and lowered her voice. "When Mom ends up in assisted living, everyone will know it was because you walked away. You'll be the daughter who chose paperwork over her own mother." The words found the fear she intended them to find. I pictured Mom in an unfamiliar room, asking why I had not prevented it. For several seconds, the key between us looked less like control and more like the last chance to keep everything from changing. I left without taking it. When I returned to the motel, Ivy was sitting at the small desk with colored pencils spread around her. She had drawn a 2-bedroom apartment with uneven windows, a narrow kitchen, and a bright yellow lock on the front door. 2 figures stood inside, one tall and one small, both holding keys. I placed Brooke's draft beside the drawing and read the final designation again. "Unpaid backup caregiver, available as needed." They were willing to give me a key back, but only if I agreed to return as the person whose work could be used, whose name could be erased, and whose daughter could be left outside whenever the arrangement became inconvenient. The apartment was smaller than the drawing Ivy had made, but it had 2 bedrooms, a narrow kitchen, and a lock that worked when I turned the key. The carpet was worn near the windows. The cabinets had been painted too many times, and the view overlooked the back of a grocery store. Still, when the property manager handed me the lease, my name was printed beside the word tenant, and no one else could erase it with a family vote. I used most of what remained in my savings for the deposit and first month's rent. Signing the lease did not feel like winning. It felt like admitting the motel was not temporary, and that Mom's house might never become ours again. My hand shook when I wrote the date, but I signed anyway. The property manager gave me 2 sets of keys. I placed one in my purse and kept the other in its small paper envelope instead of giving it to Ivy. The apartment was still empty, and part of me was afraid that placing a new key in her hand would close the old door forever. I told myself I would wait until we had beds and curtains, but I knew furniture was not the real reason. I spent our first afternoon there sitting on the bare living room floor with my laptop open. Karen had asked for a structured care handoff, so I created one that another person could actually use. I listed Mom's medications, allergies, doctors, pharmacy, upcoming appointments, dietary restrictions, fall risks, and the symptoms that required an urgent call. I also included the things no medical chart captured clearly. Mom often said she felt fine when she was dizzy because she feared being sent to the hospital. She hid swelling beneath loose socks and minimized how often she used the walls for balance. If she became unusually quiet after standing, someone needed to check her blood pressure rather than accept her first answer. Writing those details felt like taking apart a life I had built one habit at a time. I knew which mug made Mom drink more water and which chair gave her enough support to stand without panic. I knew she would refuse oatmeal if it looked too thick, then complain of weakness because she had skipped breakfast. None of that required me to return, but all of it mattered to the person who would take my place. At the end of the document, I added a boundary in plain language. I could answer reasonable questions about Mom's history when Karen or a medical professional contacted me, but I was no longer available for scheduled shifts, overnight supervision, emergency coverage, or backup caregiving. I read the sentence several times before sending it. Karen called after reviewing the handoff. She did not congratulate me or tell me I had done something brave. She said the information was clear. The temporary professional caregiver had accepted responsibility for the current plan, and my boundary was valid. "You have transferred what is needed for Elaine's safety," she said. "You are not required to remain an unpaid substitute for the person assigned to provide care." Hearing it from her did not remove the guilt. It only gave the guilt a shape I could recognize as separate from responsibility. Brooke responded by calling relatives. By evening, I had messages from people who had not asked how Ivy was doing, but suddenly knew that I was jealous, vindictive, and trying to force my mother into assisted living because I had not received caregiver payments. According to Brooke, I had disrupted a successful arrangement after discovering she was being compensated. My Aunt Denise called while Ivy and I were measuring the bedrooms for secondhand furniture. Denise reminded me that Mom had stayed with me after my divorce, helped when Ivy was an infant, and loaned me money when my car broke down years earlier. Every memory was true, which made her argument more painful than Brooke's lies. "Your mother was there when you needed her," Denise said. "Does none of that matter now?" "It matters," I replied. "That is why this hurts." "Then go home and fix it, before strangers take over." I looked through the open bedroom doorway at Ivy, kneeling on the floor with a tape measure. Strangers are not taking over. A trained caregiver is doing work that was already supposed to be organized and documented. Denise sighed. "You know your mother doesn't trust outsiders." "I know. I also know she left my daughter outside in the rain. That was wrong, but families survive things like this by forgiving each other." Forgiveness was being offered as another word for returning to the same arrangement. I nearly agreed to visit Mom and settle things privately, because I remembered her sleeping on my couch after Ivy was born and warming bottles before I asked. Those memories were not fake. They simply did not erase what happened later. Ivy had stopped measuring. She stood in the doorway, holding the metal tape between both hands. After I ended the call, she said, "I still miss Grandma." "I know. But I don't want to sleep somewhere they can change the lock while I'm at school." Her voice was steady, and that made the sentence harder to hear. She was not asking me to hate Mom. She was asking me to understand that love did not make a locked door safe. The next morning, my supervisor forwarded a notice that the team lead position had reopened. I had turned it down 4 months earlier because the rotating evening schedule conflicted with Mom's care. My first instinct was still to calculate who would prepare dinner, monitor blood pressure, and stay through the late hours. Then I remembered that those hours no longer belonged to the house. I submitted my application before I could talk myself out of it. I did not imagine a promotion solving our problems or transforming me into someone powerful. I only allowed myself to want work I had earned, without first asking whether my family could spare me. Karen's meeting notice arrived that afternoon. The MCO required Mom, Brooke, and me to attend a care planning conference because the reported roles no longer matched the information being verified. The purpose was to determine who had provided the services, establish a safe plan, and address disputed hours. Attached was a preparation sheet listing dates that required clarification. It did not contain Brooke's complete records or private medical notes, but it showed that service confirmations had been approved under Mom's employer account across many months. The authorization marks repeated week after week. I stared at them until the dates blurred. I had spent days protecting the possibility that Mom signed one page without understanding it. This was not one rushed signature. Someone had approved changes repeatedly, including weeks when Brooke was away, and I was the only person sleeping in the house. I still did not know what explanation Mom would give. I only knew the explanation would have to account for more than confusion. Brooke sent me a photograph of the statement she had brought to the diner. The new key rested on top of it. "Sign it, and Mom can stay home." The message reduced every fear I carried to one choice. If I signed, Brooke's version of the past could remain intact. Mom might keep the arrangement she wanted, and the family could say I had finally calmed down. If I refused, payments could stop, Brooke could lose her position, and Mom would have to accept a life she had spent months avoiding. That evening, I stood alone in the empty apartment, while light rain touched the windows. I imagined a professional caregiver opening Mom's cabinets, asking permission before helping her shower, and learning the routines I had once believed only I could manage. I also imagined Mom sitting in the house she feared losing, convinced that her daughter had chosen paperwork over her. I called Karen and asked what would happen if I told the truth at the meeting. "The payments may remain suspended while compliance reviews them," she said. "Brooke could lose her qualification to provide paid care. Elaine will need a different plan, and I cannot promise what the financial outcome will be." I did not ask what punishment Brooke might face. I asked whether Mom would be safe. Karen confirmed that the temporary caregiver was scheduled, the medication plan had been transferred, and someone other than me was now responsible for each approved shift. After the call, I printed Brooke's statement and placed it on the kitchen counter. Beside it, I placed the care handoff Karen had accepted. One sheet would keep the lie alive by putting my name beneath it. The other would keep my mother safe without requiring me to disappear inside her life. The meeting was the next morning, and I knew I could choose only one. The meeting took place in a small conference room at the community health center. Karen sat at one end of the table with a laptop open in front of her. A compliance specialist named Mr. Hale appeared on a video screen mounted to the wall. Mom sat beside Brooke, holding her purse tightly in her lap, as though someone might try to take it from her. I chose the chair across from them and placed my folder, the gray medication notebook, and the completed care handoff on the table. Karen began before Brooke could speak. She said the purpose of the meeting was to determine who had performed the disputed care, make sure Mom remained safe, and create an accurate plan going forward. She made it clear that no one was there to decide which daughter loved Elaine more. Brooke's mouth tightened at that, but she nodded. Brooke spoke first anyway. She described herself as Mom's primary caregiver and said I had always helped whenever I felt like taking control. She admitted that I prepared medication and handled some appointments, but claimed I inserted myself into tasks she was already responsible for. She listed several days when she had driven Mom to lunch, picked up prescriptions, and stayed at the house while I worked. Those days were real. That was what made her story sound convincing. I did not argue with everything she said. When Karen asked about a specific date, I opened my calendar and answered only that question. I showed my hospital schedule, appointment confirmations, pharmacy pickup records, and messages Brooke had sent asking me for updates. Mr. Hale noted each response without reacting. The first disputed shift was a Saturday in February. Brooke said she had spent most of the day with Mom. I confirmed that she had taken Mom to lunch. Then I showed a message sent less than 2 hours later, asking me whether Mom had eaten dinner and whether her ankles were still swollen. My phone location and a grocery receipt showed I had returned to the house before 4 and remained there through the night. Brooke leaned back in her chair. Rachel chose to take over. That doesn't mean I wasn't responsible. Karen moved to another date. Brooke had been assigned an evening shift, but her social media photographs placed her at a bridal shower in Baltimore. She argued that she had clocked in before leaving and remained available by phone. You cannot provide in-person assistance from another state, Karen said. I had coverage, Brooke replied. Who provided it? Brooke looked at me. Rachel did. Mr. Hale asked whether the change had been entered under my name. Brooke said it had not been necessary because Mom still received the service. The next date placed Brooke at her salon during hours recorded as home care. Another showed her attending a wedding in Ohio. Each time, she repeated the same explanation. I had been there. Mom had been safe. The work had been completed. Finally, Brooke put both hands on the table. She volunteered. No one forced her to do anything. The family still received the care. So, who exactly was harmed? I looked at Mom. She kept her eyes on the clasp of her purse. Karen opened a disputed service matrix prepared by compliance. It did not contain Mom's full medical record or Brooke's complete service notes. It listed dates, time ranges, and questions requiring clarification. Karen asked about March 17th. Brooke's face changed slightly. She said she remembered the night because Mom had experienced a fall in the bathroom. According to Brooke, she had assisted Mom from the floor, checked her blood pressure, and stayed with her until the reading improved. I placed my hospital schedule on the table. I was not working that night. I was home. Brooke shrugged. You may have come in later. I lived there. Karen asked what time the incident occurred. Around 2:15, Brooke answered. She described Mom beside the vanity, frightened but conscious. She said the blood pressure monitor had been brought from the bedroom, and that Mom's left slipper had become caught beneath the cabinet. The room became very still. I turned toward Brooke. How did you know about the slipper? She blinked. You probably wrote it in that notebook. I didn't. You wrote down everything. Not that. It had nothing to do with her treatment. Brooke looked toward Mom, then quickly back at me. Maybe you mentioned it. I never told you. Karen did not interrupt. Mr. Hale remained silent on the screen. I turned fully toward my mother. Did you tell her what happened that night? Mom pressed her lips together. Mom, did you tell Brooke about the slipper under the vanity? She glanced at Karen as if hoping the question could be ruled inappropriate. Then she looked at Brooke, whose confident expression had begun to crack. It was only a detail, Mom said. My hands went cold. Why did she need it? Mom lowered her eyes. Brooke needed the hours to match. For a moment, I thought I had misunderstood her. What does that mean? She needed to describe what happened during the time she was assigned to be there. Real details made the reports consistent. I stared at her. The memory of that bathroom returned with painful clarity. My knees on the cold tile, Mom gripping my wrist, her whisper asking me not to leave. I had believed the moment belonged to the two of us. "How many times did you do that?" I asked. Mom shook her head. "Rachel, this is becoming cruel. How many times did you tell Brooke what I did so she could report it as her work?" She could not say it happened once. Instead, she admitted that when I handled an appointment, stayed through the night, or responded to a problem, she often told Brooke what had happened, when it began, and how long it lasted. Brooke tried to soften it. She said the program required detailed documentation and that Mom had only helped make the records accurate. "The records were not accurate," I said. "They had your name on them." Mom's voice rose. "The money paid part of the property taxes. It kept the insurance from being canceled. It bought supplies, and it helped Brooke make minimum payments while her salon was struggling. You were already taking care of me. You didn't lose anything." I looked at her across the table. "You locked my daughter outside so no one would see who was actually doing the work." "We needed the house to look consistent with the plan," Brooke said. "You were supposed to collect your things before Karen arrived. You made it into something bigger." Karen asked Brooke whether she understood that reporting work performed by another person could create a false payment record. Brooke's restraint finally broke. She was doing the work anyway. Why shouldn't someone in this family get paid for it? That sentence revealed more than any record could have. They had not only believed I would continue caring for Mom, they believed my work belonged to the family before it belonged to me. They believed they could decide its value, attach Brooke's name to it, and still call me selfish if I objected. Brooke opened her folder and placed the new brass key beside the statement she had shown me at the diner. Mom pushed it toward me. "If you sign," she said, "we can put this behind us. You and Ivy can come home, Brooke can continue handling the program, and I won't have to live with strangers walking through my house." I looked at the key. A week earlier, I would have seen access, forgiveness, and the possibility of restoring what we had lost. Now I saw the price attached to it. Mom's voice softened. "If you walk out, I may lose this house." The old guilt rose exactly as she expected. I imagined overdue taxes, insurance notices, and Mom packing the rooms where she had lived with my father. I also remembered Ivy beneath the maple tree, holding a useless key while two women watched through a camera. I opened the gray medication notebook and slid it toward Karen with the completed handoff. It contained the current schedule, doctors, pharmacy information, fall risks, emergency instructions, and the details the professional caregiver would need. "This is everything required to keep Mom safe," I said. Then I took the form from Brooke's folder. I drew a line through my name beside backup caregiver and initialed the change. I signed the page confirming that my handoff information was accurate, but I left the statement crediting Brooke for my work untouched. "I will not let Mom be medically unsafe," I said, "but I will not keep your lie safe." Karen confirmed that the temporary professional caregiver would remain in place while the payment records were reviewed. Brooke's caregiver payments would stay suspended during that process. No one was arrested, and no one declared a final punishment. The room simply lost the version of reality that had allowed everything to continue. I gathered my folder and stood. Mom called my name as I reached the door. I stopped long enough to feel every instinct telling me to turn around, comfort her, and explain how we could repair the damage. I did not return to the table. In the hallway, I removed the old blue-capped key from my keyring. I closed my hand around it until the teeth pressed deep marks into my palm, then called Ivy. "We're going home," I told her. For the first time, I did not mean my mother's house. In the weeks after the meeting, nothing collapsed as dramatically as Brooke had predicted. No police cars arrived at my mother's house, and no one led my sister away in handcuffs. Her status as a paid caregiver was suspended while the program reviewed the disputed hours and asked her to explain the shifts she had claimed while working at the salon or traveling out of state. Karen told me only that Brooke could be removed from the program, required to repay payments tied to false entries, and referred for further review if the evidence showed deliberate deception. Mom received a professional caregiver 4 afternoons each week and a fall alert device she wore around her wrist. She complained that the woman rearranged the kitchen towels and asked too many questions, but she also stopped calling me whenever she felt slightly unsteady. The caregiver learned her routine, kept the medication schedule current, and encouraged her to do small things for herself instead of waiting for a daughter to appear. The strangers Mom had feared did not take her house or strip away her independence. They created a structure that did not depend on guilt. Brooke continued visiting for the first 2 weeks, usually long enough to tell relatives how exhausted she was. Once there was no payment attached, and no photograph that made her look devoted, her visits became shorter and less frequent. She still brought groceries occasionally, but she no longer stayed through showers, appointments, or difficult evenings. The work she had described so confidently on paper became much less attractive when she had to perform it in real time. The family group chat remained full of accusations. Some relatives said I had humiliated Mom, while others claimed I had destroyed Brooke's income over a technicality. I sent one message and nothing more. I wrote that Mom had a safe professional care plan, that her medical information was private, and that I would not debate the investigation with people who had never asked who actually did the work. Then I left the group. At the hospital, my supervisor called me into her office and told me I had been selected for an interview for the team lead position. My first reaction was not excitement. I thought about the rotating evening schedule and felt the old fear that choosing my career meant abandoning someone who needed me. When my supervisor asked whether I was still interested, I almost gave the answer I had given 4 months earlier. Then I remembered the care handoff, Karen's confirmation, and the professional caregiver whose job was to be present during approved hours. I told my supervisor I wanted the interview. I did not feel fearless when I said it. I simply stopped treating fear as proof that I was doing something wrong. 6 weeks after the lockout, Karen helped arrange a 2-hour window for Ivy and me to collect the rest of our belongings. Mom agreed Brooke would not be there when we arrived. I told myself we were only retrieving clothes, documents, and a few personal things, but my hands tightened around the steering wheel as soon as the house came into view. The maple tree had lost nearly all its leaves. The porch looked exactly as it had before, except the new silver lock remained in the door. Mom opened it before I could knock. For a moment, the three of us simply stood there, separated by a threshold that had once required no thought at all. Inside, the house smelled of cinnamon tea, furniture polish, and the lavender detergent Mom had used since I was a child. My father's blue coffee mug was back on the second shelf, its handle turned outward, as though someone had placed it there for me. Seeing it hurt more than the changed lock had. The house had held real love before it became a place where love was used as leverage. Ivy went upstairs to pack her books and clothes. I followed her into the bedroom and found the pencil marks on the doorframe where Mom had measured her height. Ivy touched the highest line with one finger. "Do we have to paint over these?" she asked. "No, they belong to the house now." Her face fell, so I took out my phone and photographed every mark, including the crooked letters she had written when she was 10. "The memory doesn't disappear because we don't own the wall," I said. "We can take it with us without taking the wood." Mom stood in the doorway behind us. She looked smaller than I remembered, though I knew that might have been because I was no longer rushing to fill every empty space around her. "I never thought you would really leave," she said. It was the closest she had come to an apology. "That was the problem," I replied. "You believed I would stay no matter what you did." Mom looked toward Ivy, but my daughter continued folding clothes into a box. I could see Mom searching for a sentence that would soften what happened without requiring her to name it. "I was afraid," she said. "The taxes were behind. Brooke was struggling, and I did not want strangers deciding whether I could remain in my own home." "I believe you were afraid. That does not explain leaving Ivy outside." Mom lowered her eyes. "I know." She reached into the pocket of her cardigan and held out a new brass key. "Keep this for emergencies." I did not take it. Karen and the professional caregiver have access. If there is a medical emergency, you call them, or 911. A key cannot be the way you make me responsible again." Her fingers closed around it. The rejection seemed to hurt her, but this time I did not rush to repair the feeling. Brooke returned before our 2 hours were over. She came through the kitchen carrying grocery bags and stopped when she saw the boxes near the stairs. "You said they were taking essentials," she told Mom. Then she turned to me. "You're stripping the house because you couldn't stand being told no." I lifted the gray medication notebook from the kitchen shelf. Karen already had the complete handoff, but the notebook contained my handwriting, appointment reminders, and years of personal notes. It belonged with me. "I'm taking our clothes, documents, school things, and personal property. You destroyed this family just to prove a point." I looked at her without raising my voice. "This family broke when you left a child outside in the rain to protect a timesheet." Brooke opened her mouth, but I carried the box past her. There was nothing left to argue that had not already been exposed by her own words. Before leaving, I removed the old blue-capped key from my purse. I had carried it for 6 weeks, even though it opened nothing. I placed it on the kitchen table beside the fruit bowl, not as a weapon and not as a trophy. It was simply a key to a door I no longer intended to ask permission to enter. Mom watched me set it down. "Will I still be allowed to see Ivy?" "That depends on whether you can take responsibility without asking her to comfort you," I said. "She is not going to tell you that what happened was all right so you can feel better." Mom nodded slowly. For once, she did not ask me to make the answer easier. Ivy came downstairs carrying one box and the half-finished crossword book she and Mom had worked on together. She could have left it behind out of anger, but she placed it carefully on top of her clothes. Loving her grandmother and refusing to live in that house were not opposites, and I was relieved she did not believe they had to be. We carried the last boxes to the car. When I closed the trunk, I heard the front door shut behind us. I did not turn around to see whether Mom was standing at the window or whether Brooke was watching through the camera. For the first time, I was the one who had chosen to walk away from that door. As we pulled out of the driveway, Ivy reached across the console and took my hand. "Are you sad you gave the key back?" "Yes," I said. "I am." She squeezed my fingers and looked once at the house through the side window. "Good," she said. "That means it was a home once. It just isn't ours now." 6 months after the afternoon Ivy sat beneath my mother's maple tree, I found her waiting outside our apartment in the rain. For one sharp second, my body remembered everything before my mind caught up. I saw wet hair, a backpack pressed against her chest, and a child standing on the wrong side of a locked door. Then Ivy grinned and lifted a yellow keychain shaped like a small sun. "I wasn't locked out," she said, as I hurried toward her. "I wanted you to see this before I used it." She slipped the key into the lock and turned it easily on the first try. Rain dotted her jacket, but she was not shivering, and no one was watching her through a camera while deciding whether she belonged inside. Our apartment was smaller than Mom's house. We had no wide living room, no porch, and no backyard where Ivy could mark the seasons by the leaves on the maple tree. The kitchen table barely fit between the refrigerator and the wall, but every mug, book, and photograph was where we had chosen to place it. Nothing in that apartment depended on another person allowing us to stay. I had received the team lead position at the hospital 2 months earlier. The raise did not make us wealthy, and I still checked grocery prices before putting anything in the cart, but my schedule was clearer and my work was finally being recognized. For years, I had treated my time as something everyone else could claim first. Now I understood that being dependable did not require making myself endlessly available. Ivy had returned to drama club. On the night of her first performance, I sat in the 3rd row while she played a hotel manager in a school comedy and delivered 3 lines with enough seriousness to make the audience laugh. My phone remained silent in my purse. I did not spend the performance wondering whether Mom had taken her medication or whether Brooke would call and say I was the only person who could help. Mom was not abandoned. The professional caregiver had become part of her routine, and Karen helped enroll her in an adult day program twice a week. Mom complained at first that the activities were childish and that the caregiver cut apples too thin, but within a few months she was attending a balance class and eating lunch with the same group of women every Tuesday. She had even begun preparing simple breakfasts for herself, instead of waiting for someone to serve her. Outside help had not destroyed her independence. In some ways, it had required her to rebuild it. Brooke lost her qualification to work as Mom's paid direct care worker. The compliance review verified enough false entries that she entered a repayment agreement for the disputed payments. She still told relatives that the system had overreacted and that I could have handled everything privately. Nothing about the consequences had transformed her into a different person, and I stopped waiting for a lesson she did not want to learn. Mom asked to meet us at a diner halfway between her house and our apartment. She did not ask me to come home, and she did not call Ivy first to pressure me into agreeing. I asked my daughter whether she wanted to see her grandmother. Ivy thought about it for a full day before saying she would meet her for lunch, but she did not want to return to the old house or stay overnight. Mom was already seated when we arrived. She looked healthier than she had at the care planning meeting, though nervousness made her keep smoothing the paper napkin beside her plate. She had brought the half-finished crossword book she and Ivy used to work on at the kitchen table. She placed it between them without assuming Ivy would take it. For several minutes, we spoke about school, my new position, and Mom's balance class. Then she put both hands on the table and looked directly at Ivy. "I knew you were outside," she said. "You rang the bell, and I saw you on the camera. I agreed to change the locks, and I let you stay in the rain because Brooke and I wanted the house to look a certain way for Karen." Ivy lowered her eyes to the crossword book but did not rescue her from the silence. Mom turned to me. "I told Brooke what you did for me. I gave her the times, the details, and the things that happened when she was not there so she could report them as her work. I knew you were the one caring for me, and I believed you would keep doing it no matter how I treated you." There was no sentence about everyone making mistakes. She did not blame the stroke, the paperwork, or Brooke's persuasion. She said she had been terrified of losing the house and frightened that strangers would decide how she lived. Then she added that fear explained why she made the choices, but it did not make them right. "I used your love as if it were something I owned," she said. "And I used Ivy's place in the house to control you. I am sorry." Part of me had waited months to hear those words. Another part remained guarded because apologies could not undo the sound of the chain holding that door nearly closed. I told her I was not ready to say everything was forgiven, simply because she had finally named it. "Trust will have to be rebuilt," I said. "You cannot call Ivy to make her feel guilty. You cannot use your health to make me come running. If you need help, you follow the care plan. If you want a relationship with us, you respect the boundaries even when you dislike them." Mom nodded. She cried quietly, but she did not ask either of us to comfort her. Ivy opened the crossword book and flipped through several pages. "I can meet you here again next Saturday," she said, "for 1 hour." Mom accepted the offer without bargaining for more, and that mattered more to me than tears or promises would have. Before we left, Mom pushed the crossword book toward Ivy. She did not offer her a key to the old house. Their relationship would not be rebuilt through unrestricted access to the place where it had been broken. It would begin with 1 hour in a public diner, a half-finished puzzle, and the freedom for Ivy to decide whether she wanted another meeting. That evening, I gave Ivy the second apartment key with the yellow cover she had chosen. I told her it was not a prize. It was a responsibility and a promise that we would never use shelter, access, or belonging to punish each other. "If you're angry with me someday, you still get to come home," I said. "If I'm disappointed in you, this door still opens. We can have rules, consequences, and difficult conversations, but neither of us gets to turn home into a weapon." Outside the hallway window, rain ran down the glass in narrow silver lines. Ivy inserted the yellow key, turned it once, and opened the door without struggling. She stepped inside, then looked back and held it open for me. The woman who knocked on my mother's door that morning had not brought a miracle. Karen had only asked who was truly doing the work. What changed our lives was that, for the first time, I answered, without making myself smaller to protect the people who had erased me. That key did not open the biggest house I had ever lived in. It opened the first home where my daughter never had to wonder whether love could change the locks.